Art in Australia has a long tradition. In fact, the first iteration of the magazine was called Art in Australia, started in 1916 by Sydney Ewis Smith, who was the publisher. He was the publisher of the Bulletin. He was a great advocate for the arts in Australia. And in 1916 was the middle of the First World War. And we actually have a terrific set of those original magazines in the library here. There was a gap during the Second World War, and in 1963, Sydney's son, Sam Ewis Smith, started Art and Australia. And Art and Australia became the go-to magazine for people interested in the arts in Australia, for the development of Australian art, the development of the Australian art industry, if you like, the galleries, the whole business of art. So it was that 1963 continuity that we are maintaining. We were gifted this fabulous asset, cultural asset, from Eleanor Triggerboff, who was the publisher of Art in Australia from the early 2000s. She was looking for a home for the journal, or the magazine as it was then, and the digital archive. And so she approached us about having the university accept it for the idea of longevity. And so we did. It was transferred to us in 2016. And at that point, it was, if we accumulate the history of Art in Australia, the earlier iteration, and Art and Australia, the more recent one, that was the 100th anniversary, 2016, because it was started in 1916. So we thought that was auspicious. And we also took it back to print. We, in our enthusiasm, thought we love print. We'll take it back to print and take the format of the original 1963 model, which was a slightly square format. When this gift from Eleanor Triggerboff was on the cards, I went to the bookshelf, saw number 1, 1963, Ian Fairweather painting on the cover, and a few pieces of writing in there that we thought might be worth picking up on and reprising as our first issue. And so we did that. There was one article that was called Australian Painting Now, and not one woman artist mentioned, and so we thought that might be worth having a look at. And so we invited Julie Ewington to reflect on that, and she wrote a terrific essay. And so we had 8 exciting issues of the magazine format over the 5 years, all but one edited by Edward Collis, and the last one by Dr. Tessa Laird, which was a terrific contemporary examination of the relationship between humans and the natural world. There was a lot of discussion when we first took it on about the approach. You know, where was the serious writing about art now, other than in academic journals, which are often quite limited in access? So what was a combination that we could build that had a contemporary focus, a currency, but also a depth of critical engagement? By being in a university context, we can involve the research done by art academics, art historians, artists, and so on. And that itself would become a very important representation of the times. We established what we call the Art in Australia Study Centre as a part of the platform. And that's where we'll have that as a repository for research that's being done, archives of artists' work, one-off programs, things that have some resonance.
I started with Art in Australia at the beginning of 2022, and at that time, Sue Baker, Editor-in-Chief, had decided to pivot Art in Australia to a digital publishing platform. And I started to work with Sue, our design editors, Karen Ann Donaghy and Andy Simeonato, on that platform. And we wanted to take cues from the previous magazines we'd published and pay homage to John Warwicker's design. So it's very graphic, bold, visual, and it provides lots of different entry points into the magazine. That's what led how we wanted to shape the publication. So it could include image essays, videos, audio embeds as well. And also within the publication, there are kind of more discrete edited publications that came out of some of that content that Sue had developed. I've been working on publications with CoVA since 2018. I initially was awarded an internship with Art in Australia, which began my love affair working in this area. And from there, I coordinated the Australian and New Zealand Journal of Art, which is Australia and New Zealand's preeminent peer-reviewed art history journal. And alongside that, I was working on Currents, an interdisciplinary graduate research journal based out of the University of Western Australia and University of Melbourne. Both very different. One very traditional art historical academic approach, really long form articles. And the other was really looking at a combination of more traditional research and artistic research, because I'm an artist and was really interested in how that can get platformed to a similar level as things like art history. So the Art in Australia archive is an incredible resource that came with Art in Australia when it landed with the Centre of Visual Art at VCA. It dates back to 1963 and includes upwards of 4,000 articles. And that chronicles and documents, this 60-year period of Australian art and art history. And anybody you can think of, who's been integral in Australian art, you can usually find in the archive, whether it's writing by them or about them. You can look up James Mollison, Bernard Smith, Julie Ewington, Juliana Engberg, even, science fiction, Indigenous writers like Alexis Wright have articles in the archive as well. So it's an amazing thing to get to navigate and negotiate. And we are currently undergoing a process of redigitizing the entire archive. So that's, like I said, 4,000 articles or so. And that's to be able to do full text extraction, to make it more accessible on numerous levels, including going open access. So that means that it'll no longer be behind a paywall, and this incredibly important resource of Australian art will be publicly available to everybody. So it was important when we approached the designers with the redesign of Art in Australia that we'd have the front end magazine, which is trying to talk to quite a broad audience. And then we would also have the Art in Australia Study Centre, which allows for longer form research projects to be included within the centre. And that was inspired by Ioanni Scarce and Lisa Radford's project Concrete Archives, which looked at nuclear testing on country. And that was a year-long project and has become an important education resource since it has been published. AI, the hot topic, we decided to pull together an issue out of an open call, which we hadn't done for a number of years. And we got a range of really, really exciting responses to the theme, and it seems to be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And our design editors, Karen Ann Donaghy and Andy Simeonato, have worked with electronic publication and early versions of AI for a long time. So they're also really excited in shaping that into, our cover designs and the overarching design for the issue.
Project Anywhere has its origins in two problems, one which is located in art more broadly and the other in artistic research. Lots of projects happen outside of traditional exhibition environments, outside of traditional galleries and theatres and performance venues. And the problem for artists that are presenting work outside of traditional circuits is drawing attention to them. How do they transcend arbitrariness? How do people know that an exhibition or event is taking place? So that's one problem which is perhaps applicable to art more generally. The other problem, of course, is how to evaluate validate and disseminate artistic research, the kind of research that artists do. And this idea of a blind peer review model as opposed to a curator as a gatekeeper was an intriguing idea. What would happen if we democratized the way in which artistic projects are selected for exhibition? So it's kind of like a blending of a peer-reviewed journal and an artist-run space which considers the whole planet and potentially beyond as exhibition space. One of the challenges facing artists that are working outside of traditional circuits is how to transcend arbitrariness, because art can in some ways be continuous with the world. The kinds of activities that might otherwise be recognizable as research projects or as protests or as performances outside of the context of art need to be given some kind of context to be understood and read, if you will, and evaluated as art. So one of the challenges we've faced is how to use the vehicle of a website, not as a way to present work, but rather as a portal to make people aware of the existence of works and projects taking place elsewhere in space and time. Well, given that we're here in the extraordinary 1971 car park engineered by Jan van der Molen, which of course was famously used as a set for Mad Max, has been used by the Australian Ballet, I believe, and many other student and film projects over the years. This is a good opportunity to talk about the value of presenting works in outside of traditional exhibition circuits, and the curious way in which contemporary art, and sometimes a single work or project, can manifest across multiple modalities, across multiple times and spaces. For example, you might encounter a performance taking place in a remote location and later encounter it as a video installation in a gallery and later encounter it as a series of documents surrounding a research project. There are often many portals, if you will, or ways into the world of a work. And I think the way that artistic research and materially distributed artistic practices can work together to develop, test and speculate upon new knowledge formations is a fantastic example of the way in which art and research can produce new knowledge. For me, the key things are taking advantage of the web and its capacity to deliver and present multiple audio, visual and text-based content together with the value of independent scrutiny, peer review, rigor, and the kinds of expertise that we want to bring to bear upon the leading frontiers in a discipline, which is what we're trying to promote here. The recent publication, Where is Art?, which was co-edited by myself together with Adam Getze from the University of Sydney and Professor Simone Douglas from Parsons New School, both of whom are on the Project Anywhere editorial committee, was also developed and tested as a seminar at the VCA between 2017 and 2019. So it was an opportunity to give some of these ideas a walk around the block, if you will, with students and to develop relationships between pedagogy and research as well. For many artists particularly and philosophers of art in the 20th century was the question, what is art? And although this question is by no means resolved and it remains contested, perhaps in the 21st century the question has mutated somewhat to become where is art? Or by extension, when is art? Which is interesting to ask when we think about works which exist in multiple versions, in multiple times and places. For example, as I mentioned before, a work could exist as a direct sense-based experience in a particular location or locations, and then through video or through image or exhibition, and still be understood to be a single work. I guess a good analogy there would be the extent to which a song could be endlessly remixed, yet still maintain that sense that it is a single work. So stretching the sense that a work can maintain its identity as a work, yet be multimodal and multiform, and that the spaces of relation between these multiple versions or parts or materializations of the work, which we might regard as mutually insufficient together with the core concept to present the idea of the work of art, are potentially infinitely malleable and interchangeable. We can always imagine adding another version, another materialization, another location. How far can we stretch the identity of a work of art until it breaks? These are all interesting questions to me. In the edited volume, Where is Art?, We've been particularly interested in ways in which art can be experienced, but still evolving relationship between the art world, artists, and artistic research, and the university is interesting, and the NTRO, or non-traditional research outcome. As soon as you step outside of the context of the creative arts, although there are other parts of the university that also produce NTROs, that you find yourself having to explain not what you're doing as research, but how and why what you're doing is research. So it's still an evolving space, and I don't necessarily think it's a comfortable space at all times. And we still have to prosecute a case for the value of art as research and as representative of the what's really happening at the coalface of new ideas in the discipline. At its core, artistic research offers a way of providing knowledge and experience and information where together it is more.
Unlikely Journal for Creative Arts was a project that I started when I was director of the Center for Creative Arts at La Trobe, and I had a number of postgraduate artist research students, and I was very aware that there really wasn't a place for publication for artist researchers. It would begin with an exhibition, because of course exhibitions are so important to artists, and artists involved with the exhibition and then other artists in response could document their work or make other work that responded to the theme of the exhibition or of the journal, to respond to the needs of those students, because in those days there wasn't really a place for them to publish. There were text-based places, but not places where you could be media rich, and you could both link out to other media, but that they could actually put online documentation or original work that they made. So media rich was one of the things we really wanted to do. Those were the main concerns. The first issue was called Feral, and I think that really spoke to what we saw we were doing. Like, we wanted to be transdisciplinary. So it wasn't about a particular discipline, like a lot of journals are around a singular discipline. It was artists from all sorts of disciplines, but in conversation with each other around a theme. So the idea of feral really spoke. I actually wanted to call the journal Feral, but some of the other people in the group didn't want to do that, so we came up with Unlikely, which works as well. But the idea that it's sort of undisciplined and it's unexpected and unlikely. I went to VCA as an honorary professorial fellow, and as part of that, thanks to the wonderful Sue Baker and Barb Bolt, we brought Unlikely with us. I think it's always been important with Unlikely and in my own work that, it's not about giving information, it's not about just simply documenting, it's really about thinking about a question, thinking about a concern through art. I think one of the lessons with Unlikely has been a spirit of experimentation and not to lose that. And so whatever platform you use, to try and explore its openness rather than, impose limits on it or finding its limits. Because, I'm continually surprised by what people do with Unlikely, and that's, to me, the joy of actually being involved with it is, wow, how did they come up with that? I started as a more traditional academic. I actually started in Russian history, and it was a bit of a bizarre trajectory, but through that I went into oral history and got involved in community radio. And so radio was really the first art practice that I was involved with. And then I got commissioned to do freelance work with the listening room at the ABC to make radiophonic essays. So I really moved into the whole area of sound art, but really radio and connecting to people through their voice, it has always been important to me. So sound and voice really were my way into art practice. In the mid-1990s, I began working with Maria Miranda on a CD-ROM project called Shock in the Ear, and that was a new media work. I mean, in the days when new media was just sort of happening. It was very exciting in those days because it was still new, and so the boundaries, the rules weren't really set yet, which is always where I like to be, you know, so you don't necessarily have to break the rules because the rules aren't in place so firmly yet. And part of my, I suppose, interest with CD-ROMs was looking at what was around at the time, and there were two things that really bothered me. One was the interactivity, which was just point and click. You know, it was very mechanical and almost disengaged, even though it was a form of engagement. There's something I was disengaged with that point and click. And the other thing was the machine aesthetics. Now, I mean, I understand that because it was a new area, people were interested in machine aesthetics, and it was working with machines, but I found it a bit cold and limited, and just didn't speak to me. So I wanted to work with a different sort of more sensual aesthetics and more sound-based. I mean, that was the other thing. It just felt like sound is so engaging and so rich, and it wasn't really foregrounded, wasn't really leading any of the CD-ROMs. We moved away from CD-ROM to net artwork, and we made quite a few works in the early 2000s. That was a really, again, an exciting time because the parameters weren't set yet, and it wasn't so, you know, you still had to do some of your own programming. Not that I did it, Maria did it, but, you know, so it wasn't just being driven by pre-existing programs. Like, there was more room to really explore a bit. And one of the things that was happening a lot then was this sort of approach called fictive art, which really, I think, came out of the internet, where you never really knew. I mean, it was a different sort of thing where who was the author of the work? I mean, talk about death of the author, like, they're not there. You never knew, like, is this the person who says they're making the work? Is it them or isn't it them? For us, it was a sort of play between the real and the imaginary, and letting those two, not knowing which exactly you were in, and letting them sort of disturb each other. When Melanie Swalwell approached me about a LEAF grant that she wanted to get together around archiving heritage work through emulation, that's where with an emulator, they can take old, retired, you know, discarded work and make it available. So, you know, of course, I thought that was really exciting and really valuable, because that work, you know, as she said, and this is the reason she got, you know, a huge LEAF grant, you know, Australia was really one of the leading places in new media art, and also games and all sorts of media art, and it's been lost. And it's important. I mean, having come once upon a time from history, I think it's really important not to lose history, like to be able to be really active and engaged with the present. It's important to know history, I think. And also, one of the works they wanted to emulate was Shock in the Ear, which I have to say, that was such a joy when, you know, I thought this work was lost forever, and suddenly there it is, and you can engage with it, and it was like, oh, hello, there you are, where have you been? You know, it's like, you know, sometimes the work is like your baby, and it's been lost in the desert or whatever, and there it was, and it's been so thrilling. And I'm sure the other artists feel the same, like that this work will still be there for, you know, even if just as a historical archive, it still has life, and I think it still has something to say.